So it would be cool if this had some nice, neat origin story, right? Like, some simple one sentence that said, "Oh, I started doing this because of this," but there isn't one of those. There's a few different things that happened, like I guess sort of as a precursor kind of thing is in the 80s in New York. My friends DJ Steve Haglin and Mike Zwicky did scrap metal music. They did that one night at ABC No Rio as kind of a thing, and kind of made some instruments a little bit. Mike could weld, and did a show with it. And it was kind of cool. It was, and after that we started doing that like all over the place. We kind of did regular gigs as where we just, go out and round up what we could find around and play it. And we did that quite a lot, that was pretty fun. Like, it wasn't a common thing to do yet then either. It was sort of, I think Steve and Mike should get props around that. They sort of got that thing going, kind of as a thing. Anyway, that was sort of, a precursor to this, They didn't really start me making instruments. I made a few things then. I was like, I made some kalimbas then and stuff like that, but it was sort of a, I don't know, they were pretty marginal to my life, It wasn't, and I wasn't thinking of it like as a thing, So I don't know if that really counts. But anyway, the seed was planted, Sort of, it was very much, that was flat out just noise. It was really, some of our ones, we did some in the cellar of the Emerging Collectorate and stuff that were just, it was kind of, hellish in a celebratory way. Anyhow, another thing that contributed to this was several years later, we had a band, and it was it was a weird kind of band. We had a cello, and I played guitar, and we had bass, and then we had 3 kit drummers, and we never really got very organized or anything. We kind of played once a week, and it was fun, but it was just with 3 drum kits going, it was, it just got kind of out of hand a lot, like, and I started thinking then how cool it would be if we could get drummers, to play something other than the drums, like to use their skill sets, but just not make more and more drum sound. Sometimes one of them would play hand drums, but basically it was just kit drums. So you just get all this like cymbal sound and snare rattle and, thundering tom-toms and stuff like that. And I think that experience kind of made me start disliking the standard drum sound that we have, wanting more thump and stuff from them, less of that, rock and roll, Remo drumhead drum sound. And start getting something else from percussion and these standard kind of things that you've heard a lot of times before. And that year I tried to hack a Casio keyboard. And I thought, oh man, if you could just make things that, so you could play the keys by hitting something with sticks, you know, so the drummers could have fun, but it would, you know, add other tonal voices to the music, you know, this might be more interesting than just this, you know, kind of 3 string players, you know, competing with 3 drum sets, which is kind of how it came out a lot. And so I tried doing that, and I'm not very good at electronics, and I'm not, you know, I was woefully ignorant in those days too, and I couldn't make it work. You know, if I'd had something older, I might have been able to get it to work, but everything was routed through chips and stuff like that, and so you couldn't really get to the, you know, yeah, you couldn't just like do a key thing. I don't know, they all played the same note, you know. I fiddled around a lot with that and kind of got nowhere, and I kind of lost my enthusiasm too, because I've never liked those sounds, you know. Like the reason I was willing to hack my Casio keyboard was because I didn't like playing it anyway, you know. So, yeah, I just really don't like those synthetic sounds very much. And so nothing came of that. But the idea stayed in my mind that, man, it would be cool if we could get, you know, people who could drum a bit to like think about tonality and pitch in what they did a little more, you know. It's like at the time we were having like full moon huge drum circles on top of this hill that were, you know, that were pretty fun, and we'd have like, you know, oh, I don't know, 70 to 150 people playing stuff, and it just sounded like, you know, a lot of times it just sounded like lots of djembes, right? You know, and I like djembes, you know, they're great, but the, you know, I don't know, being me, I wanted something else from it. And that was around that same time, and also sometime in there, I started to really miss horns. I'd been playing guitar, and I kind of felt like I was banging my head against doing anything very different in it. I never really got that interested in effects. You know, that seems to take the, for me, you know, that seemed to take the playing away from me. It seemed to like put me behind yet another wall. And so, you know, like a lot of guitar players, like, were starting to do that then, like get like, you know, lots of pedals and lots of things to try to kind of break out of the typicalness of guitar playing. I took kind of another approach to that. I was like, you know, musically at home, I was doing a lot of things with tone rows and trying to figure out a way to use that for guitar playing. Tone rows are pretty hard to play on a guitar, you know. You know, they require some really awkward fingerings and stuff like that. And so I put a lot of practice time into doing that. But I still wasn't thrilled with, like, it, you know, it was something different and it was something challenging, so it was something worth working on, but it wasn't really, you know, I kind of wanted to like get through this a little bit, and I started to really miss playing horn. So one of those winters, I was living in New York, and so I went, you know, around 48th Street, and I think it was Art Shell. Yeah, I think I went to Art Shell to look at instruments, and man, they had got expensive, you know. Like when I was coming up, saxophones were a dime a dozen, you know. Like music stores just had piles of them that they couldn't get rid of because, you know, during the 60s, like wind instruments kind of disappeared and guitars took over. So, you could get pretty good, you could get a pretty decent horn for like, $100 or whatever, and you could get a beautiful horn for like $300, Even I think brand new Selmers cost like $500 for a tenor, there just wasn't a market for them, and there was this huge surplus left over. And so it was really easy to find, altos and tenors and like that. Anyhow, that had really changed by, this was probably like 1999. I was just amazed at the expense, like a really nice alto cost, $3,500 and stuff like that. And I was living in an apartment, and with, I don't know, I was kind of embattled there. I ended up being evicted. It was an illegal, technically I was a squatter there, but, so like saxophones are loud. You can't really play them without your neighbors hearing them. And my upstairs neighbors weren't that fond of me. And so I thought, okay, like, a bassoon would be cool, bassoons are quiet, they kind of, nobody would have even known. So I thought, okay, maybe I'll get a bassoon. So anyhow, I go to Archel, and I'm talking to the guy, and I said, how can I get like a student bassoon? And they were like $3,000. And so I said, what can I do about this? And he goes, well, you're a handy guy, and I said, yeah, I'm pretty able. And he said, well, I can sell you a broken one, for about $1,500. And that was a non-starter, but. It was a plastic one, anyway. And I think you can always hear the plastic with those, it's like, there's just something about plastic, like its surface bounces wind sound. It's like, I don't just love PVC instruments because of that, because there's this kind of wangy sound that they make, So he didn't get that. Sometime, these things all happened at the same time. I don't remember the order of them or anything, but I was visiting my friend in Cambridge, and we're going through Harvard Square, and we were on our way to do something, so I didn't have much time for this, but I saw a street performer who'd made this one-man band thing, and it was really cool. His name was Eric Royer, and as far as I know, he still does this, but it was this ingenious mechanical setup, and so he could play like bass and rhythm guitar and like a kick drum hi-hat kind of thing, and he could kind of do those with his feet, and then sing and play the harmonica along with it, and it was cool. It was like. And it was very clever mechanically. It was, got to see him do like a couple of songs, and that really stuck with me as, I was very impressed. And so all these things are kind of fusing together, and I can't really remember the order of the events, Anyhow, then, and this is what I like to say as the real origin of an orchestra, is that I was living in Providence, and it was New Year's Eve, and a few hundred of us were at Fort Thunder, Anyone who was around Providence will know what Fort Thunder was about. Fort Thunder's awesome. Lightning Bolt is from Fort Thunder, and Matt Brinkman, cool place anyway. Lots of cool things, fun shows, great parties, whatever. And so there, I was hanging out with my friend Mike Rinaldi, and he said, "Hey man, let's make some instruments." And how to make things, and and he had this book, not the Bart Hopkin one. It's I think Reinhold something or other was the guy's name. But he had this book with the formulas for making bar percussion. In those days, Mike was basically a percussion drummer kind of guy, and so I hadn't really, kind of thought of it as a thing to do that much before then. I'd fiddled around a little bit, and I'd seen that guy with the one-man band and thought about it a little bit, but I hadn't really got in the shop and did that. So anyway, that was our our sort of a New Year's resolution, was that we were going to do this. And so we got started on it, and I lived in Providence for, I think, the next couple of months, and that's what we did. We made some kalimbas and some xylophones and things like that, and learned quite a bit. I don't think any of them survived. I know Mike still has the first thing we ever made, the Nice Knives, which was kind of a combination of a cowbell and a kalimba. It was fun, and so that's where it really began. And then I left Providence and went to Chilmark, where I really had a shop, and so I started doing that, and I started a whole lot of my thought was, because we'd had that band with the 3 drummers before, was to make instruments that you could play with sticks that weren't drum sets, and that you could order pitches on, and things like that, and get other people to play. Because another thing that I wanted to do for a long time was to have bands that could have people that maybe weren't musicians in them, largely because musicians you end up with just bunches of dudes all the time, music's hideously, disgracefully male, and chances are out of 100 musicians you might get a few women involved in it, and chances are in a band, if unless you deliberately set out to do that, you're going to end up with a woman in a band with a bunch of guys, which our cellist was female in the prior band. And you still kind of end up with this whole sausage fest thing going on, which, it's who wants to do that, right? So I thought if I could make things that didn't require musician skills, that people could play anyway, you could have, a more diverse band. And so, going from the street performer in Cambridge, one of the things I was thinking about was things you could tune to chords and have them change pitch with, different sort of foot-operated capos kind of on them. And so I worked quite a lot on that. And the other thing was the drum thing, thinking about getting different drums, tried out a lot of things. The first drums I made had heads made out of leather jackets, and that I found in the dump or the thrift store, and they would last a few minutes or whatever, but never found a real cheap way around decent skins. But that's when I really got started on this in earnest, was Providence in there, and my thought all along was that this would be, you'd integrate these into music with instruments in them. So I made, an upright bass, made a few kalimbas, made xylophone, some drums, a couple of different stringed instruments that were played with a capo fret thing, the foot-operated capo fret thing. What else was there among there? Made a harp. Just trying to break out of this guitar thing, and get other things, and I wanted to get something with more, I wanted to be able to get more parts in things that did different things, I was really loving Fela at that time. Like, I woke up and danced to Fela every morning. And so that's sort of what I was envisioning, and I still thought that there'd be, guitar solos and, trap drum sets, drum kit sets, and, that kind of stuff. And the other things would all kind of fit around the edges of it. So after about a year, I had a collection of instruments. I made a few horns too, I found out that clarinet mouthpieces fit in a copper pipe adapter, so you can just like stick them onto a pipe and drill holes in it and get different pitches, which was a cool thing. And I really wanted that sound back in music again. So I sort of fiddled around with that stuff too. So I had a few horns, a few drums, a couple of basses, a chord playing instrument, a harp, and like that, kalimbas, xylophone, because really kalimbas and xylophones are they're really good places to start with that. And so that's sort of where it began. Anyhow, and my thought was all along to integrate them with other instruments. And so then I started recording to see how they behaved. It's one thing to be playing something, and it's another thing to get to listen to it. It gives you some perspective. What does this really sound like? Well, the way to really find out how something sounds is to record it and then listen to it kind of without being involved in playing it. And so my first thought was I'll create sort of rhythm section stuff, and then I'll play guitar solos, right? Because life is all about guitar solos. And I kind of liked what I did, and but I never really liked the guitar with it or the bass. When I had a clarinet that I would play too, and oddly to me, what happened was that those instruments, the ones that I hadn't made, sounded kind of cheesy to me. Even me trying really hard to, and I was a pretty good guitar player. Even me trying really hard to be original and creative with the guitar, it still just sounded like a guitar solo, right? So at that point, I sort of bailed on the whole guitar band thing, which, retrospectively looking back, I've been really uncomfortable with. And so it began, and I recorded until my machine broke, So I made a few pieces, which are called Rumor. That's the first one. And I really liked how the instruments tended to have less specific tonal fields than the traditional ones did. And this was a little bit retrospective too. But I started to understand that you don't have to have a rigorously unified tonal field to things. You can create a sort of consensus tonal field from, here's the thing about metal instruments And I was a metal worker, so that's what I made everything out of. It was like I never was a good word worker. I kind of became a welder because, because I was a very poor cabinet maker, and wood's really expensive too. And where I was living at the time, you could go to the landfill and just pull scrap out of the roll-off they had for it, and that was where I got the material, so economically that was really feasible, and all that. The thing about metal is it's very receptive to resonance and things like that, so that if you make something, it'll have kind of its own harmonies within it, and they're really complicated. They're not like the traditional Western instruments have all kind of been designed and engineered to minimize any resonance other than what specific pitch you want from it. Metal instruments, that kind of doesn't happen. They make their own fields around themselves. And what I found out while I was making the pieces of rumor was that the sort of ghost fields would just be there, and that within that, and I spent tons of time tuning. I actually really enjoy tuning, and tuning responsively, not like trying to tune this to this exactly. It's not like being a piano tuner. It's, it's sort of different. It's like finding the resonances in things and creating a voice for that instrument that likes that, and then you play it with something else, and that has sort of a different field for itself, and so you find things within them. It's so complicated that there's no point trying to work this out with the mathematics very much. It's more like listen a lot and find the things that work in here. And so that phase of recording got to be about that, and so it was really after several months of building instruments and maybe even a year of it that I just kind of turned my back on conventional instruments. I still have my guitar and I play it sometimes, but I found we had another band and we were pretty good, but I just wasn't into it. I just I could psych myself up and play, and we do good, and I really loved playing with the people who were in it, and but just musically I wasn't excited about it. I couldn't wait to get home to the stuff I built and make things where, musically it was so much more of a challenge to think deeply about tuning instead of just tuning things and and playing in the pitches you're allowed to play on guitar. That was a guitar, bass, and drums band. Anyhow, yeah, I just kind of, so I kind of just, I don't know, I just didn't have enough enthusiasm to really keep going with that project, the band project. And so at that point I kind of turned my back on that, I had a piano and I played it every day, and, listened a lot and thought a lot. But that's sort of where this came out of, and the whole process, you could say it took all my life, you could say it took 15 years from the 80s up till 2000, you could say it just, those, the end of the last millennium, I think it was all 99, all that stuff happened, that we had that band and saw the guy in Cambridge, and New Year's at Fort Thunder, like all those things sort of made this perfect storm, kind of. And and trying to trying to buy a bassoon, like those things all sort of congealed into doing this, and so at that point it sort of took over my life because I found something, I was in my 40s then, and finding something exciting to do in music again after like kind of feeling frustrated by it, it's well, any musician will go through different phases, like they really like something and they work on that and like figure out how to do this thing, whatever it is, and that's what keeps you going. But then you have points where you just feel sort of stale with it, and I'd been feeling that, and I didn't really like the going on the road thing, performing. I was always kind of ambivalent about like the performing thing anyway. I liked doing the music more than I liked the social stuff, the attention, crowds of people, I'd been all over America. I'd been living in cars for, large portions of the last 10 years, all that kind of stuff, and was sort of sick of it. And so like all that, like that standard stuff that had always kind of moved me along about, excited me, giving enthusiasm to, having a band, being in a band, like playing music, all that kind of stuff. It was harder to come by, it was like, sometimes I felt like I was going through the motions, In that last band, I kind of would find myself doing that. Even if I really liked what I played, I felt like, oh man, how this is going to come out, It's like, felt like I was parsing things instead of, developing new vocabulary. And so doing this kind of gave me like that, that same thing that like I remember when I was 10 and I first got a guitar and it was so mysterious and, there's so much to learn about it. And man, it was really exciting. The same thing, I got my first saxophone when I was 17, almost 18, and like, here's this whole new universe to explore, It was that kind of feeling again. And I still sort of have that. Anyway, kind of right around then, I dated at New Year's 2000. I kind of just turned my back on conventional instruments, Mike and I had been playing in Providence, him playing drum set and me playing guitar. And what we did with these things we made, and they were very good, and like, there was still a lot to learn about them, but it was just fresher and more exciting to me than what we played on the normal things, Anyhow, that's kind of the non-linear, complicated version of the origin story. A year after I'd done the recordings was, did the first show with them, and that was really fun. The first show we did, we played for 15 minutes and broke everything, It was, it was pretty awesome. It was really, avant-garde, noisy, and yeah, that was pretty fun. And that's when, by then it was really established, like this is kind of what I'm doing with my musical life. An interesting coincidence about that was, like I said, I'd been, living in vans and stuff like that, and various squats. Like where I lived in Providence was, just this nasty former storage room, in a mill building, and sometimes I had a school bus, that was parked in my brother's driveway in New Jersey, and I kind of converted that and lived in there. But I kind of sort of felt like, gee, maybe why I'm not enjoying life that much is like I don't have a home. So I bought land and I was going to homestead it, and this was all coincidental with all that too. The beginnings of my midlife crisis, perhaps. And I didn't think of it that way at the time. I am somebody that always needs to be doing something to have something that you give yourself to, a reason to like get into it every day, right? And so I was going to homestead this place, build a house, like dig a well, do all that kind of stuff. And I had been involved in construction trades, all my adult life. That's the only like paying work I've ever been involved in, And at the same time, I was starting to build instruments, and so it would come like time after time this happened. Like I'd get up and I'd go, oh, okay, I'll go to the lot and get to work on this, and I would just stay home and work on an instrument instead. And I kind of realized after a while, like, homesteading is really fun, and I've helped a lot of people with theirs, and but it wasn't as much fun as for me as doing the instruments, and you can't really do anything without like putting yourself into it and your enthusiasm. So the homesteading thing kind of like bogged down, and didn't really go anywhere. Built a couple of shacks, set up a solar power system, had that much. So there was sleep and electricity. We tried to sink a well by hand and didn't work. Gave up. Again, there was economic constraints, was I couldn't afford to like, hire contractors and do things, it had to be like DIY. And anyway, I just ended up, putting the enthusiasm and whatever money I had into doing, making instruments instead of like, building myself a home in the heart of the country. And that's what happened. And then I left town and moved to New Mexico like a year after that, And that was really the end of that. By the time I went to New Mexico, I knew I was not going to homestead, and I really knew I was just like, okay, this is who I am now. And so that's been who I am ever since, And so that evolution probably took like 4 or 5 years to happen, Started with just sort of fiddling around, and, I'm being so impressed with Eric Royer's one-man band setup. I just really liked it. It had little things on strings and pulleys, and it was cool and clever. And I remember when I looked at it, I thought, I remember thinking, oh, the cleverness of it sort of got me like, I don't really want to say jealous, but jealous a little bit. Like, that's really cool. I wish I could do that kind of, not so much the playing of it, but the way these like things worked, I'm very impressed with that. I'll always be very grateful to that guy, Never met him, never talked to him, just like caught him playing a couple of songs in Harvard Square, you know. Anyhow, you know, I'm really glad, like a broken bassoon costs, you know, $1,500, you know, otherwise I might have delved into that. And and all the rest. I'm really grateful to Mike Rinaldi for just kind of putting this front and center. You know, I'd been welding and doing metal work for at least 10 years at that point, and I just hadn't thought about building instruments really that much, honestly. You know, having the formulas there, and they even had designs. Having that was that was really good to have the confidence about that, you know, and you know, it kind of gives you a fixed point, you know, to do things like it. It would explain the physics of them a little bit, and you know, so it wasn't mysterious physics stuff, you know. It was like, oh yeah, okay, that works like that. You make it longer, it gets lower. Okay, you know, this is, you know, that kind of stuff.